see you. Mr. Rucker, how are ya? We spent most of the meeting talking about you yesterday. Yes. Your ears.
Other than what we were talking about, Jerry.
Other than, exactly. Okay, great to see you this morning. Carol and Brenda, thank you so much for organizing dinner last night. Very well done. We welcome everybody who is here today. We are going to pick up on the workshop agenda, and it's going to be on VTrans. So Jatinder, I was actually trying to call you because I couldn't see you. I was like, oh my gosh, are you here? Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Today we will be giving a short presentation on VTrans, and Mr. Danu and I will quickly go through 4 or 5 slides. Madam Chair, we made a presentation at the board meeting last month, and we gave an update on the 2 items shown on the slide. The purpose of today's presentation is to answer 2 questions that were raised at the end of the last meeting and request board action. I believe it is item number 19 on the action meeting agenda. So very quickly, the action that we are seeking on VTrans vision, goals, and objectives, and VTrans midterm needs that will be, among other things, utilized for the next round of smart scale, have gone through several iterations. So the iteration that we have made available on our website on vtrans.org, all the documents are available there, is the 3rd iteration, and it reflects the comments and feedback that we have received. So at the end of the last presentation to the board in December, we received 2 specific questions. So Mr. Whitworth, you had a couple of items related to not necessarily the VTrans needs, but how they get utilized for smart scale. And we have, as part of the resolution, included an item for the consideration, which essentially says that urban development area needs will be considered as regional network needs if there aren't significant number of congestion needs present in a regional network area.
And Madam Chair, if I could just kind of cut in, Mr. Whitworth and I had extensive discussions about this item. What the intent of this is, and this is reflected in whereas clauses in the resolution, is to ensure that in regional entities, particularly in the western part of the state, that those MPOs will still have the ability to compete within the high priority projects funds for some of their identified needs. So again, in the eastern part of the state, there are congestion, other needs that meet the way the regional network methodology. What this effectively says is the Harrisonburg MPO can submit a project under the regional network needs that was identified initially as a UDA kind of need, just for purposes of going under that kind of funding rubric. And the past VTrans, with the way we had defined it, that was appropriately incorporated. Mr. Whitworth and I, again, had many phone calls on this particular topic. The kind of really key point is, in many of those areas, the key regional needs deal with economic development, not just congestion. And so we're trying to make a change in the resolution here to reflect that reality. I thought Mr. Whitworth raised valid points. It took us a long while to kind of figure it out, but that is effectively the intent of this provision. The second bullet that you see here would essentially say that a planning district commission or an MPO could also submit a safety problem on a corridor of statewide significance into the high priority projects fund. That's always been past practice, and it was the intent, but there was confusion and lack of clarity on that issue, and so we wanted to make it explicit in the resolution, so as applicants worked on their upcoming smart scale applications, there wasn't any confusion or uncertainty for them.
Secretary,
Ms. Hines.
just a quick question. So Nick, did I understand you to say that both of these things that you just talked to us about were how we did it in the past?
Madam Chair, Ms. Hines, the safety thing is exactly how we did it in the past, and we had a slightly different definition and needs assessment as how we did the needs in the regional networks last time, and so these projects were submitted for the statewide funds in the last 3 rounds of Smart Scale. These types of projects, excuse me, not the exact project that may or may not be submitted, but
actually just dumped a whole new set of things into high priority. These are the kinds of projects we would have seen in the past.
Madam Chair, Ms. Hines, that is my belief.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Hey, Mr. Whitworth.
go ahead, Shep.
I'll wait.
Hold on one sec. I just know that Mr. Whitworth had signaled me early, so.
Yes, I appreciate, and I think it's worth noting the effort and collegiality that our staff has made in addressing this need, and I do appreciate Jatinder and Nick and all the staff for hearing our problem. The problem was essentially this, that with the VTrans 45 and the index that is used, it unintentionally screened out certain projects that heretofore would have been included by our MPOs or PDCs because of, and as you may recall, those two entities can only apply for high priority funds. And those entities, and especially in the rural areas, work hand in glove and closely with the cities and counties, and suddenly they felt like they were being disenfranchised from what they used to have. And so this is an effort to simply preserve that ability to still participate in the needs of the community, and more especially in the rural communities. And I do appreciate that.
Mr. Miller?
Go ahead, Shep.
So back to, I guess, to Mary's point, if we operated under the previous guidelines, these projects that you're contemplating would have been able to be considered. Under the previous new guidelines, they would not have been able to be considered.
That is correct.
So we're just going back to where we were, if you will, preserving what we had. So,
It does.
and I guess when you created these new procedures or new guidelines, this was just an unintended consequence that we didn't fully understand.
You have said it very clearly. We refined the methodology in VTrans, and again, I do think the refinements were appropriate. This was an unintended consequence there. One of the issues we had with the previous VTrans is some of the needs were written so vague that we actually had trouble screening projects. And so as we sought to refine that and to really hone that in, we were looking overall at needs and making sure all the things we thought were appropriate needs were identified. And if you actually talk to the regional entities in the Stanton district, they don't think we missed needs. It was just the way they were categorized created this consequence where before the MPO could have submitted this project for high priority, and now they wouldn't be. And so, again, I don't think I've ever been a shrieking violet in front of the board. We've brought this forward because we think it's an appropriate fix. So again, this isn't just something where someone raised a concern and therefore we immediately changed the provisions. Mr. Whitworth, as I noted, and I had extensive discussions on this issue, and ultimately he made some very persuasive points. But to your point, there was an unintended consequence. This addresses it.
Thank you.
Question?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Smoot.
Nick, to aid my understanding of this process, VTrans is a statement or an identification of needs and not of projects, right?
Chair, Mr. Smoot, the needs assessment that is on the action agenda is just a statement of needs. It does not say you must fix it this way, that way, or how any other way.
And related thereto, in order to be considered for future funding, does a identified project have to be in some way embraced within VTrans?
Madam Chair, Mr. Smoot, in order to be eligible for smart scale funding, and I think we've talked about this before, we spend a lot of time talking about smart scale. Smart scale is less than 10% of the overall surface transportation budget in the Commonwealth, but to be eligible for smart scale funds, a project must address a need. And let me be very explicit in why I use the word address.
So it has to be related to VTrans.
For example, if there traffic and hopefully get people off of 95, or say improvements to a parallel rail corridor, like we've been talking about, even though it's not specifically on that roadway where the identified need was, it would help address that need.
Thank you.
One last
Miller.
question. Are there any other substantive areas that were changed in the VTrans 2045 that would screen out projects previously included?
Madam Chair, Mr. Miller, so again, the major update for the methodology is we now, and this has again been shared with all of your regional and local partners over the past year, instead of saying there is congestion generically on I-64, we should try and address that in the Hampton Roads region. We now say on these segments of I-64, there is congestion, and we should try and address that. So that's the type of...
Specificity, but not...
We didn't say like congestion used to be you were going 10 miles an hour, now it's you're going 2 miles per hour, something of that nature. It was much more the specificity type of thing that changed. And again, we view that as an enhancement. There was this unintended consequence here, but the other issue the team has kind of had in the past is with these broad statements of, well, congestion on 64 and Hampton Road. Well, here's a project on 64. Well, I don't think this really does anything. But with the way the needs were written, there was no way to say that does or doesn't, and now we have clearer specificity.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Jatinder, do you want to finish the presentation? Not that we couldn't stay here all day, but.
So very quickly, last two slides. So the we have two more slides to go. The resolution that will be in front of the board at the meeting, agenda item number 19, will include the 4 items included on the slide. The staff recommendation is approval. One item, again, I will note is that we received a request from Richmond region to include Route 288 as a part of a corridor of statewide significance. And we looked at it, we analyzed it, and we thought it was appropriate. So that is part of the resolution as well. And the resolution finally includes 4 other items that which is essentially CTB directing staff to conduct activities. So those 4 activities are to prioritize the needs that will be adopted by the board. Just to be clear, the prioritization doesn't affect smart scale eligibility. It is for other purposes, including project planning. The second one is to the board directing staff to modify the needs that are in front of the board is if and when the data changes. So every year we get new data sets. The purpose is that before we continue using it, for several years, that they remain current and relevant. The third action is related to, there was a resolution that the board adopted, that the board adopted back in January of 2018. It was tied to VTrans 2040. So as we are updating these needs, the board is directing staff to look at that resolution and see if that needs to be modified. And finally, the board is directing staff, which is as included in the Code of Virginia, to also look at the long-term needs beyond the first 10 years of the planning horizon. So with that, if there are any questions, I can address those. And again, this is agenda item number 19 on the board action meeting.
Secretary, I have one question and one comment. When we're talking about number 2 here, which is updating the needs, one of the concerns that we have in my district is that there's an awful lot of road building going on right now because of the presence of MBTA money. So it's waiting to be accepted into the VDOT system sometimes, and some of those projects are not reflected in the maps that we have before us today because they're not accepted into the system yet or anything. So I'm just wondering if number 2 basically takes care of that issue?
Yes, ma'am, it was included for that particular reason.
Oh, perfect, great, that'll make everybody really happy. And then number 3, I just kind of want to put a pin in this one. I'm a little troubled by the language. I wish that it would say review and provide recommendations if warranted. to that resolution. It really doesn't say that. And this is an important piece of the puzzle to me. This is how we determine where we're going to spend our very scarce planning dollars. So I'm not sure that I am interested in seeing any changes in this. And so the way it's worded right now really just basically directs staff to bring us changes. At least that's how I read it.
So, Madam Chair, I think we would consider the language by Ms. Hines as a friendly amendment to the resolution. I don't think we were trying to imply that there necessarily needs to be a change to that previously adopted board policy. Just as we had kind of gone through another round of V-Trans, we were trying to say, take a look at it, make sure everything's still in order. If it's in order, we have no desire to come back and bring unnecessary changes. We also just wanted to take a look to make sure there wasn't anything, as the landscape has changed, that might require any modification. So I think that reflects the intent, and we would not take any issue with a modification of that nature.
Maybe I'll make a motion to just add those words, if warranted, after the recommendation when we get to 19 then.
Anything else? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jatinder. And I thank you both. I thank you, Jatinder, and Mr. Donahue and Ronique Day for really being determined to work through this process and incorporating all the opinions and concerns and recommendations of everyone on the board. So thank you very much. I think that is our last item from the workshop. So we, Director Mitchell, do you have any report today?
Just a quick update on our Amtrak ridership. We're very excited that in the calendar year 2019 compared to calendar year 18, we had a 15% ridership increase this year. So we're very excited about that. And in December of this year, we actually had our highest ever month of ridership, with over 100,000 riders, which was actually up about 26% compared to December of last year. So the changes that we made back in March with the new Norfolk service and the schedule optimization is continuing to result in much higher ridership from Hampton Roads in general, where we've actually seen a 20% increase in ridership from there since we instituted that new Norfolk route. So again, just another more continuation of our strong Amtrak ridership trends.
Make sure that Amy White gets that information as we are going through a number of presentations in the coming days, so thank you for that.
Sure.
Could I ask a question? Do you have any updated information with reference to VRE ridership?
I don't offhand, but I could probably get that for you.
That would be beneficial. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to ask the commissioner, one of the issues that I asked the commissioner to address in his comments really resulted from Mr. Kaspowitz coming on behalf of your environmental committee, Mr. Johnson, about discussing the bird issue in the bird issue over in Hampton Roads within the environmental task force, which did not meet during this particular CTB meeting. But I wanted to be able to have the commissioner be there to let you know where that process is in working with Natural Resources and the Department of Inland and DGIF, Game and Inland Fisheries. So anyway, so I wanted to at least set that up because I would love for the commissioner to be invited to come either in February or March, depending on how work is going.
Certainly will do that, Madam Secretary.
I'm
Thanks.
waiting for Mr. Kaspowitz to go, I don't know if that's such a good idea. No.
So as for my comments this morning, we've had a number of press articles in the paper with regard to the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel expansion project concerning migratory birds. And I'd like to give you an update, one of which is certainly a letter that we've worked with the Secretary of Natural Resources, Secretary of Transportation, Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, to be able to craft a Commonwealth response back to the issues that we're experiencing at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. That is at your desk. That has been sent out to the inquiries and letters that we've received and the governor has received on this issue. But first and foremost, I want to say that the department is committed to conducting the project in a manner that's fully compliant with federal and state regulations as they exist. The Commonwealth takes seriously its commitment to balancing the impacts and benefits of transportation-related projects, not particularly just isolated to the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project, but also all projects in general. Having said that, I just want to say that the department, in consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, and a number of other regulatory agencies, had conducted over a 2-year period a study to evaluate the options that were available to us, particularly the conservation measures for the bird population that does exist on the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel South Island maintenance facility. I will say that all the agencies that were contacted with regard to this issue recognize that an interstate facility is not the appropriate place for a bird population to be nesting. As such, we engaged researchers from Virginia Tech to conduct an assessment to fully evaluate and vet on-site and off-site options that were available to us, in particular to the HRBT. But I will say that all were deemed either unsuitable for the birds, unlikely to be permitted by the regulatory agencies, protected as a historic resource site, or posed a collision risk back to local aircraft, particularly the Navy and other FAA entities. So, but I will say that the Commonwealth has received a number of letters requesting that a separate island be built. What I will say is that the Virginia Department of Transportation will not be undertaking a separate island construction that would be associated specifically with the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project in itself. Now, having said that, the Commonwealth, in particular the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, has taken an initial stance with the Army Corps of Engineers and has asked the Army Corps of Engineers, starting in October of this year, to conduct a feasibility determination of whether an island can be constructed and be permittable for that stance. I spoke to Ryan Brown, the Director of Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, as late as last night. He has had an initial meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers on this subject. They have discussed the process that would be associated with moving forward in the feasibility determination. He is in the process of better understanding where the Commonwealth would stand in the queue to have the Corps conduct the feasibility study. I will say that in conversations with him, it's not going to be an overnight process. It will be a process that will take a little bit of time and evaluation by the regulatory agencies to determine whether or not an island is permittable in process. I should note that until we can identify what that process is and what it would look like, the financing, permitting, and timing of any initiative of this sort is yet to be determined. Once we get into the process, we'll have a better idea of better understanding of where that is. But what I will say is that the department is committed to working with the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, the Secretary of Natural Resources, and the Secretary of Transportation to be able to address this issue in some way, shape, or form. It is going to be a collaborative effort between all the Commonwealth agencies and the Secretariat. So my intention would be certainly to come back as this process evolves, potentially as early as February, potentially or as late as March, to be able to have an update back to the environmental subcommittee and regular briefings back to this board.
When Mr. Kaswitz let me know that this was an issue within the task force, I wanted to make sure that you all we're going to have the most recent information and the most recent updates. It's an issue that we have been, since we came into these positions, I would say it has been an issue for us for the past 2 years. And we've been committed to trying to find solutions, collaborating where we can to come up with potential ideas, some of which have been very creative, I'm going to say. But so as we move forward, I did want to make that commitment to you all.
We'll make sure we stay fully coordinated with the commissioner on this. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you, and that's part of the reason I think your task force is really important, because it gives us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. But I do think it's important because it gives us a place where these issues can be discussed and presented. So thank you for that. As far as did you have anything else, Commissioner? Okay. Jennifer, anything else from the Rail Subcommittee?
No, actually, pretty much.
Mr. Yates, Ms. DeTonk, anything from technology?
Chair,
Yes?
it might be an appropriate time for me to mention this, that the work group that you had asked me to
Yes.
convene to review our policies towards locally administered projects. We've got communities that like to do it. We've got a lot of communities that have no interest in doing it. We've got contractors that have issues the way some of them are conducted. So we've heard enough that it's time to convene the task force. Rob Carey and I, the deputy commissioner, have developed a list and invited people that represent local governments, represent the construction industry, highly skilled folks in BDOT's garage that will help us come to some good policy conclusions. And our first meeting will be January 28th. We'll be back to you folks
Great.
soon thereafter in terms of, I suspect it's going to take 3 or 4 meetings to come to bring a new policy, if one is needed, back to the board. So sometime this summer, we should have something for you.
Oh, that's right. I'm glad you're meeting this month, so
Right.
terrific.
Sorry it didn't come before then, but the holidays are a tough time to start them.
Yes, sir. Well, I'm not sure General Assembly is much easier, but yes, you are right. Mr. Malvin, any updates on your work?
We had a meeting with Bart Tuesday morning, and we're moving ahead. We've identified a consultant to come in and review our processes and procedures. That consultant's going to be engaged immediately, and work will start. My goal was to still present in April, maybe May, but we've got everything in motion, and I think we're making great progress. So.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Thresher. See you back there. So anything else? All right, with that, I will adjourn the workshop. We will now go into the public meeting. We will start with the public comment period. We typically ask for those who are here today to speak. I do have folks signed up, but we always welcome anyone who is here to come forward as well. We ask that you try to limit your remarks to 3 minutes. This is very challenging for me. We typically do not speak to address your issue specifically. We may address it after all the comment periods, just to give everybody a chance to speak. And I know this board knows that that's very challenging for me. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And the first person I have is Cynthia Newbill. And please forgive me if I didn't pronounce your name correctly. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Cynthia Newbill, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the Richmond City Council. Honorable Chair Valentine and members of this board, I thank you for the opportunity to comment on the I-95 Corridor Improvement Plan. Under your leadership, the city has been working with the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, the Virginia Department of Transportation, and the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. We support a multimodal approach to congestion on and along I-95. We support operational improvements on its parallel arteries through the city of Richmond. Safety is everyone's business, and it is the highest priority to the city being a Vision Zero city. Therefore, we support a comprehensive approach to safety to realize 0 deaths and serious injuries on the interstate as well as city streets. In the spirit of serving all users and all modes safely, I offer the following comments. First, the interstate system is important to the city of Richmond. It provides critical access and mobility to the city, the region, the Commonwealth, and the East Coast. Second, the interstate system in the city of Richmond needs to support the goals of the Commonwealth in partnership with the city's downtown and neighborhoods, but never at the expense of our shared economic opportunities or our shared cultural and historical resources. Third, the city strongly supports the proposed safety improvements along the corridor, including the proposed lane configuration at I-95 south to Arthur Ashe Boulevard, the full I-95, I-64 interchange at Belvedere Street. Finally, the city, while supportive of the proposed safety improvements, would like to offer some revisions and additional considerations. The proposed ramp configuration at I-95 North to I-64 East needs further study. Models show that if the westbound Broad Street ramp is closed, Oliver Hill Way cannot support the traffic from the off-ramp. No matter the solution after study, we are requesting that the CTB strongly support the Chaco Valley Streets Improvement Project, which is an active, smart-scale project in detailed design. Any proposed solution after further study needs to complement this existing and adopted smart-scale project by the CTB. The interstate project should support the vision created by the Chaco Alliance Initiative. The vision supports current two-way traffic pattern, current parking configurations, and a cycle track that would connect to our Cannon Creek Trail to the Virginia Capitol Trail. The Chaco Bottom Business Alliance, the Neighborhood Association, and City Planning Commission all agree with these important multimodal elements. The ramp configuration as proposed by the I-95 plan would not allow this community to realize this vision and would have a significant impact on critical intersections such as 18th and Broad Streets. Separately, we also encourage the CTB to support the proposed new ramp at Laburnum Avenue, I'll hurry, to I-95 northbound, only if the existing I-95 northbound I-95 on-ramp from Arthur Ashe Boulevard remains and is retained. The city is looking forward to working with VDOT and the state to achieve a balanced approach to meet city, state, and federal needs. We will support projects that improve on safety and congestion while promoting accessibility, connectivity, multimodal transit, tourism, land use, economic development, and environmental sensitivity. The development of interstate projects should be iterative, taking into account each perspective. The city is on the move, and we appreciate your consideration to continue to support our common goals and responsible growth with the appropriate transportation systems that grow with us. Thank you all very much.
Dr. Newbill, I do want you to know I was presenting yesterday, and I had a very similar thing happen. Yes.
Thank you.
Riveting.
Yes.
Thank you. Terry Cuthrell?
Morning.
What did I do?
Very well, thank you. Yes, I am Terry Cuthrell, or Cuthrell, you might call me. I'm an officer on the board of the Virginia
Could you
Society
speak
of
into the
Ornithology.
microphone?
Lift it up.
How's that?
Better.
Okay. Yes, I'm an officer on the board of the Virginia Society of Ornithology. And thank you, Mr. Britch. I appreciate it. I hope I got that right, for clarifying the current position of the department on protection of this bird colony at the HRBT. And I'd also like to thank the Department of Transportation for the cooperation you provided to scientists and to DGIF concerning the maintenance and care of the waterbird colony during the past nesting seasons on the South Island of the HRBT. For those of you who are unaware, we are at the point in time in North America where bird populations have decreased by 30%. That's 3 billion birds over the last 50 years. And the statistics for waterbirds in the Tidewater area of Virginia are worse, mostly due to habitat degradation. The South Island has been home for over 30 years to the largest waterbird colony in the state of Virginia. Among nesting species in the South Island are the state-threatened gull-billed terns, a Virginia Tier 1 endangered species, requiring, as described in the Virginia Wildlife Action Plan, intense and immediate management protective actions. The royal tern is a Tier 2 species of, quote, very high conservation need. The South Island has now been completely paved over, and loss of this site will be disastrous for the birds. The gull-billed and royal terns may be extirpated in the state of Virginia without prompt, focused action to build an island with dredge materials. The process to build a tiny bird-sized island has no permitting or financial roadblocks too great to overcome, and they should have been initiated years ago, regardless of federal policy. From my perspective, the perspective of the public, lack of transparency on this project is extremely disturbing. There's nothing in the environmental impact statement that indicates that this colony would be disturbed or disregarded. Despite the state's own wildlife action plan, nothing has yet been done to protect this colony. The birds will return in March to find a radically altered South Island, completely unsuitable for nesting. But they will attempt to nest here because they have no other place to go. Because of the unfortunate situation we're dealing with at the present time, I'm here today to respectfully ask the Department of Transportation Board to come up with a careful, well-defined plan, including DGIF and the public, to manage and protect the birds on the South Island such they are not harmed in any way. As you are aware, this alarming matter has drawn much public attention and has been covered recently by the Washington Post, New York Times, NPR, and others. Conservation measures are not optional. Care for birds and the environment reflect the larger condition of a state's well-being and its character. You have the power. The HRBT expansion project is your project, and it's not too difficult. Thank you for stepping up and protecting these birds.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to ask a question. When you all post your meetings, do you post the agenda? The subcommittee? Yes. So yes. Online, I will tell you that when the presentation, when they do the presentation, so you could know what has been done so far, if you go to the CTV website, you'll be able to see, because, you know, that would be great if you're able to join them when that presentation's made. Roberta Kellum. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. I thank you for your service to the citizens of the Commonwealth. As I am a former member of the State Water Control Board, I realize that a citizens board's intervention in staff decision-making should be a rare and exceptional occurrence. But sometimes the confines of the bureaucratic process do not allow for acknowledgement of mistakes, and that is where a board's wisdom and authority must be exerted. The situation with the nesting birds at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel requires board intervention to reverse the recent VDOT decisions and fully comply with the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. It shocks the public conscience to hear that VDOT would completely wipe out the nesting area for 25,000 birds in a cruel and inhumane way without any consideration of the impacts to the overall populations of these birds and the fact that they are a shared international resource. With the complete loss of the breeding grounds at the HRBT Island, the only other viable alternative would be the creation of a new nesting island. VDOT's own consultants recommended that VDOT create a new island before any hazing or removal of birds would be initiated. Unfortunately, it appears that internal quibbling among agencies over responsibility for building a new island has brought us to the point where we are now. 25,000 seabirds returning to their nesting ground this spring with no place to land and reproduce. VDOT also plans to harass any adult birds and remove eggs, chicks, and nests that happen to occur. VDOT seems to believe it does not need a permit for these activities. My review of the HRBT environmental impact studies, correspondence, and other reports revealed no reason associated with the HRBT expansion project that would necessitate entirely eliminating the nesting area for those birds. So these actions are not an incidental take. In fact, the EIS suggests that some areas would be left undisturbed for the birds. The American Bird Conservancy does not believe that VDOT can remove any eggs, chicks, or nests without a permit. Therefore, to the extent that any area recently paved over is not actually needed for construction of the HRBT expansion project, those areas must be immediately returned to their previous condition, and the birds must be allowed to return to breed there for the 2020 nesting season. Furthermore, it is time for full transparency on all aspects of the activities related to the bird colonies at the HRBT in order to restore public trust in VDOT and this board. Full-time video camera monitoring, frequent inspections by state wildlife biologists, and third-party access from time to time for review of VDOT's activities are required, at a minimum, to provide the necessary level of oversight to ensure that the birds are not harmed. The public needs to see any internal guidance and management protocols as soon as possible. The ultimate responsibility for the outcomes in this situation rests with this board, and I urge you to reverse the VDOT decisions and restore the nesting area for the birds at the HRBT, as well as immediately commence the new island construction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. And I also just ask that if you look at the CTB website for the Environmental Task Force, and so that you could attend that as well. Mr. Hall. Good morning, sir. Welcome back.
For having me. Thanks, Madam Secretary and members of the CT Board. I'm Tim Hall. I'm the County Administrator in Henry County, and I'm here to urge your approval of your agenda item number 20 today, the resolution that affects the Martinsville Southern Connector. We are making tremendous progress in our community, and to quote the great philosopher Ringo Starr, sometimes you need a little help from your friends, and we would appreciate any positive action on this. I thank you for your work. I know you've put in a tremendous amount of work on this. We thank you. Our community thanks you. And I also want to thank my friend from Virginia Tech. I'm a JMU graduate, so it's kind of hard to warm up to those guys. But he's done a tremendous advocacy for us, and we thank you for your work.
Thank you very much. Laura Greenleaf? Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Laura Greenleaf. I have been a certified Virginia Master Naturalist for the past 10 years, but I'm speaking to you as a citizen of the Commonwealth, not a representative of that program. I also have a master's degree in public administration with a focus in environmental policy. Some of this will be repetitive, but it bears repeating. The New York Times investigative report 3 weeks ago was the first I'd heard that the breeding and nesting ground of Virginia's largest seabird colony had been paved over for the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel expansion, and that VDOT had reportedly voluntarily abandoned planning for mitigation after the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, at the direction of the administration, has used what it characterizes as a statutory clarification to enact a sweeping and indefensible policy change that virtually eliminates liability under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Biological diversity, that is, diversity across ecosystems, species, and genetics, is what a healthy, resilient, life-sustaining planet depend on. The greatest threat to biodiversity is habitat destruction. Last year, we learned that the number of adult breeding pairs of birds in North America has plummeted by 3 billion since 1970. The seabirds that have relied on the Hampton Roads South Island are among them. Gull-billed terns, black skimmers, and royal terns are particularly at risk. The Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries Wildlife Action Plan ranks species vulnerability according to tiers. The gull-billed tern is identified as a Tier 1 species, critical conservation need, extremely high risk of extinction or extirpation, meaning locally extinct, critically low population levels. The black skimmer is ranked as Tier 2, very high conservation need, high risk of extinction or extirpation, populations in decline. The royal tern, Tier 4, moderate conservation need, showing a declining trend. I understand the competing interests and ecological complexities that make creation of artificial habitat a challenge, But it seems the DGIF and Virginia Tech biologists were committed to a collaborative process with an optimistic outcome until VDOT decided that what they were not mandated to do by the feds, they would not do. The Trump administration's clarification is now the subject of a lawsuit by a group of state attorneys general and may ultimately be struck down. But what is legal is not the sole determinant of what is just. And the wheels of the judicial system do not turn in accordance with the seasonal life cycles of migratory seabirds. In 3 months, thousands of gulls, terns, and skimmers will end a long migration, returning to Hampton Roads to breed and nest in a place that no longer exists. We know Virginia is open to business, but is it open to birds? We have taken something away for our own purposes. Virginia must meet its obligation to give something back. And I simply echo Ms. Kellum's recommendations and hope that the Commonwealth will follow them. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. The person that you had from Virginia Tech was?
The professor that wrote the original study, Jim Frazier. He'll be joining us for the next meeting.
I'm sorry?
He'll be joining us for the next meeting, he and his colleague.
Meeting and come. Yes, and I really do. I appreciate all of your comments, and just really want to assure you that VDOT has been doing everything that's not only compliant with state and federal law, but going beyond what is in state and federal law and trying to figure out and try to find some solution. So we do appreciate the passion and the care and the concern that you all have brought here this morning.
Madam Secretary, if I could add that I think one of the things that Mr. Johnson and I are going to be focused on is, are there any immediate steps that we can take to aid this return of the birds in 3 months? And there's been discussion of barges as an alternative for the terns. There's been a discussion of taking some of the area that was paved and restoring that for a period of time to allow them to nest there this year while we have time to make additional accommodations for the next year's migration. So we'll be having those discussions in the meantime.
Okay. I have a motion on the minutes. Moved. Sorry, I didn't hear the second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, Mr. Hofrichter.
Good morning, Secretary Valentine, members of the board. I have 2 highway actions before you. The first one is Route 681 in Russell County. It is a 1/10 of a mile section of roadway, and the county has requested that VDOT discontinue maintenance of that section of roadway, so then it reverts to local control. The road right now serves or touches upon 3 parcels, and 2 of them already have access to other roadways. So local staff went out, checked it, and they agree that discontinuance is proper action. With the discontinuance, the road remains as a road. It's just under local control and not under VDOT's control.
Madam Secretary, I would make the motion that we approve the
I don't know
discontinuance.
why, it seems really quiet today, the microphones. Have you all noticed that?
I would make the motion that we would approve the discontinuance.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
The second action is the abandonment of an old section of Route 58. Back in 1963, it was discontinued by the board at that time. Since then, it has fallen into disuse and is not necessary for anyone to access any property. Locality asked VDOT, Washington County asked VDOT to abandon the facility, and we support abandonment of that.
Madam Secretary, I'd make the motion that we would approve the abandonment of this section.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Snyder?
Good morning.
How are you?
I am well, thank you. I have two items for the board this morning, and the first is a locality land conveyance. It is a request from the City of Hampton by resolution for the conveyance of a portion of Aberdeen Road and Pine Avenue. Currently, Hampton maintains a section of road, so this conveyance would officially transfer the road from the state highway system to the urban road system for the City of Hampton. VDOT has reviewed this request, and we recommend your approval.
Make a motion, we approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.
Thank you. The second item I have is for the Fredericksburg District, and it is to request your approval to allow the Commissioner of Highways to enter into a special use permit with the National Park Service for temporary construction rights on the Chatham Ridge Bridge Route 3 project.
Move that we accept this authorization.
Good. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Thank you. Mr. Vlasic, good morning.
Secretary Valentine, Commissioner, and CTV board members. I have 4 decision briefings before you today. Decision briefing number 1 is from the Middlesex County Fredericksburg District. Approval of the Commonwealth Transportation Board is sought by Middlesex County for the naming of Route 633 Providence Road for its entire 1.42 mile length in Middlesex County as the Raymond W. Burrell Senior Memorial Highway. Middlesex County wishes to honor and memorialize Raymond W. Burrell Sr. for his exceptional service to his country. Mr. Burrell enlisted in the United States Army in December 1942 and served in the 761st Tank Battalion under General George S. Patton on D-Day at Omaha Beach. After enduring 183 days of frontline fighting, he returned to Middlesex County. Mr. Burrell lived a lifetime of devotion to his country, his family, his faith, and his community until his death at 100 years of age on October 12, 2019. VDOT supports this request. Mr. Rucker, would you like to say a few words?
I definitely approve, move that we accept this recommendation. Mr. Burrell provided distinguished service to his nation at a time when his nation rejected him, living under segregation, fighting in D-Day for the freedoms of our country. This is an honor well-deserved.
Second.
All those in favor, please stand. Thank you.
Thank you. Decision briefing number 2 is from the King and Queen County Board of Supervisors, Fredericksburg District. Approval of the Commonwealth Transportation Board is sought by King and Queen County Board of Supervisors for the commemorative naming of the bridge on U.S. Route 360, the Richmond-Tappahannock Highway over the Mattaponi River, King and Queen County, as the Robert H. Moorcock Memorial Bridge. The King and Queen County Board of Supervisors wishes to honor and memorialize the service and dedication of Robert H. Moorcock to the Commonwealth. Mr. Moorcock was a structure and bridge engineer with VDOT for the Fredericksburg District for 26 years. During that time, he was involved with the design, maintenance, and inspection of many bridges, including some in King and Queen County. Bridges were a large part of Bob's life, and King and Queen County wishes to recognize his service and dedication to the Commonwealth. Bob moved to Mattaponi and provided construction contract oversight for the new state Route 33 bridges over the Pamunkey and the Mattaponi rivers. He and his wife remained in Mattaponi until Bob's passing on April 6, 2019. VDOT supports this request, and Mr. Rucker, would you like to say a few words?
First of all, I would like to acknowledge his family members who are in the room and acknowledge the distinguished service of a public servant who has made a distinguished contribution to many communities across the Fredericksburg District. I would move to approve.
Second.
This region.
We also would like to recognize Martha Eddy, his daughter, and Bob's daughter.
Yes, well, thank you so much for being here. We honor your father, and we really appreciate your entire family for supporting this and being here. So all those in favor, please stand.
Decision briefing number 3 is from the Wise County Board of Supervisors, Bristol District. Approval of the Commonwealth Transportation Board is sought by the Wise County Board of Supervisors for the commemorative naming of the bridge on Route 72, Laurel Avenue over Toms Creek, Wise County, as the Rodney Douglas Pickett Memorial Bridge. The Wise County Board of Supervisors wishes to honor and memorialize the life service and ultimate sacrifice of Rodney Douglas Pickett. Mr. Pickett was a past citizen of Coburn, Virginia. As a soldier in the United States Army, he served in the Vietnam War, and on May 24, 1967, gave his life when he was killed during a training exercise on his last patrol in the country. VDOT supports this request. Mr. Stinson, would you like to say a few words?
Madam Secretary, members of the board, I support this resolution vigorously. Particularly tragic. Last days in country, he was getting ready to come home when he lost his life, and can never say enough about the sacrifice that he made or the loss that his family has endured, and that this will maybe help the family and help the community as we memorialize him. I would make the motion.
All those in favor, please stand. Thank you.
Decision briefing number 4 is for authorization for the Commissioner of Highways to enter into a second supplement of the ownership agreement between the Virginia Department of Transportation and the Maryland State Highway Administration relating to the Woodrow Wilson Bridge Memorial Bridge. In consultation with Maryland and as authorized by the board, VDOT has led a new contract for operation, maintenance, and inspection of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge via the Bundled Interstate Maintenance Service Contract. As presented to the board in the December 2019 workshop, it is now necessary for VDOT and Maryland State Highway Administration to enter into a second supplemental agreement to the Woodrow Wilson Bridge Ownership Agreement to address and ensure continued operation, maintenance, and inspection of the Woodrow Wilson Memorial Bridge and certain non-bridge portions of the highway in Maryland and Virginia leading up to the bridge. VDOT and MDSHA have jointly prepared, developed the second supplement. VDOT is requesting that the Commonwealth Transportation Board authorize the Commissioner of Highways to sign the second supplement to the ownership agreement between VDOT and the MDSHA, addressing maintenance activities relating to the Woodrow Wilson Memorial Bridge. VDOT supports this request.
Madam Secretary, I would move approval and just take a moment to thank you and Commissioner Britch for your ongoing great work with the state of Maryland. We all appreciate it.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Thank you. Ms. Pryor, it's just not a meeting without you.
Good morning. I have 3 items for your consideration today. The first is the amendment of several projects to the 6-year improvement program. I will point out to you that the amendment list before you today is slightly different than the list provided to you in your board packet. These projects are all operational projects associated with the I-95 Corridor Improvement Plan. We have removed the operation and maintenance projects from that list right now. Those projects are not needed until we have completed implementation and installation of the operational projects. And so we'd like to take a little bit more time to review the estimates for those and bring those back to you at a later date. And with that, I recommend your approval of the amendment list.
Secretary, I will move approval of these, and I will just note that we've not had our 3rd meeting in Northern Virginia, so we reserve a little bit of the right to come back and ask questions and raise issues, but we do need, as I understand it, to move these along.
May I ask, is Mr. Manel in the room? Because have those meetings all been scheduled?
They're scheduled. It's
Okay,
the
just
end of
wanna
the
make sure.
month. We just have not had the opportunity.
Yeah,
So no one from Northern Virginia can stand up and do what the councilwoman did from Richmond.
I would echo those sentiments as well.
So with those sentiments, any further discussion?
Second.
Okay, now, any further discussion? those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Thank you. My second item for your consideration is my normal monthly transfers, and I recommend your approval.
Approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Thank you. And my last item is an action item related to a presentation I gave last month on the Arcola Boulevard project in Northern Virginia. The county has requested cancellation of this project. They plan to complete the project with a developer along the alignment that they prefer and according to the schedule that they have set out for that project. The action would release $28.9 million in district grant funds back to the balance entry for allocation in round 4, and I recommend your approval.
Secretary, I move approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hetzel. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have 2 items. They're both location approvals, and for convenience sake, if you want to take the stairs 2 at a time, they are in the same posture in terms of good order. We've done our public involvement. The projects have been environmentally reviewed here at the department, and they do have the review and endorsement of the chief engineer. The first is was on Route 632 in Goochland County, Richmond District. The second is on Route 643, Rio Mills Road in Albemarle County with the Culpeper District. And subject to any questions you may have on those, the department would appreciate an endorsement.
I'm going to take them as 2 separate votes. And so, Mr. Brown?
Moved.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And then the second one is in the Culpeper District, and I'm missed it.
Moved. Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, members
Thank
of the board.
you. Mr. Dudley.
Good morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have 3 items for your consideration today. Our first item is a request for economic development access funding. Prince Edward County in Lynchburg District has requested EDA access or economic development access funding to assist in providing road access within Prince Edward Business Park. The proposed access project will provide a 20-foot wide, approximately quarter-mile long asphalt roadway from Commerce Road to access 4 parcels on approximately 43 acres. The Virginia Economic Development Partnership has provided its support for the project. Prince Edward County will administer the project, and Lynchburg District has concurred in the project design and an estimate of a little under $2.1 million. The Local Assistance Division recommends approval of $650,000 of Economic Development Access Program allocation for the project request.
Mr. Dodson.
Madam Secretary, this is a stretch of road. Some of you know where Hampton-Sydney is, and you take off 460 and go down the road, and on the right-hand side there's a new Lowe's, and right down the road there's a new VDOT facility. It was moved from Dillon, which had a 1950-year bridge building or something, and this access would have opened up around 400 acres, I believe, for development, and we have plenty of room. They actually dedicated the facility just a few months ago, and we moved for recommendation for the project.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Thank you. Our second action item is for approval of our annual revenue sharing deallocation. Under the revenue sharing program policy and guidelines, the Local Assistance Division conducts an annual review of projects to be sharing projects that may be subject to deallocation, or any project that has not been initiated within 2 years of their allocation, completed projects with surpluses and no expenditures in 6 months, active projects which have had no expenditures in 24 months, and of course canceled projects. After consultation with our district staff, the allocation letters were sent to 47 localities in November of 2019. Since that time, 4 localities, Chesterfield County, Loudoun County, Montgomery County, and the City of Richmond, requested that one or more of their projects be reconsidered for deallocation. as they had continued needs for the allocations. We reviewed those requests, and in consultation with their district staff, were able to concur with those requests. A list of those projects removed from our original deallocation list is in your decision brief. The Local Assistance Division recommends approval of the remaining deallocation of revenue sharing funds totaling approximately $33 million identified on the 84 projects on attachment A of your resolution.
Any further discussion?
Madam Chairman, is there a way, I mean, I'm not that familiar with the intricacies of these individual projects and the process in general, but you know, a lot of this money is some of it's 7 and 8 years old, and it's just been sort of sitting out there. Is there a way to speed this up anyway? You know, where it doesn't take 6 or 7 or 5 years to figure out that we're not going to spend this money and put it to use where it can be useful to the Commonwealth? Perhaps that's a discussion for a different day. But just as you see these things, it's not 2 years later, it's sometimes 5, 6 years, 7 years later. And we're just sitting on money we ought to be using to advance the Commonwealth's causes.
Mr. Dudley, the allocations go?
I'd have to look closely, but yeah, sure, some of them may go back 7 or 8 years. Most of the allocations, if you notice, are on completed projects, so they have been completed. On occasion, they will move slowly, just depending on the circumstances of the project. We've worked with localities to try to move things along, and we continue to work with localities to move things along as quickly as possible.
Mr. Whitworth.
One of the things that we did when we revised, we tightened up the time frame from which deallocation would be triggered. And a prime example of that is right in my own district. I hate deallocations, and I have had this conversation with my respective counties. There are 2 major deallocations in my district. They were allocated in 2018, but in the future, I think we really got to make sure that when we grant these grants, we need to stress upon the counties that they have the intent and the ability to go forward, and not just a hope that a developer is going to come up with matching funds. And that's really what happened in $19 million of 2 projects that didn't please me.
With you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Mr. Dudley, would you mind looking into that?
Absolutely. Sure.
About how, because we're deallocating very recent projects, and there may be some that have been
But
on
on
the books for a
occasion, you
while.
will see a locality that is depending on a developer to provide the match, and then the developer backs out for whatever reason, and then we have to deallocate the project. Those are, you know, if we can deallocate them quickly within a year, that's a good thing. We can get the money back into our reallocation, to our application process this year. I think one thing to point out here is the deallocation. It's really this amount of deallocation is really showing the benefits of our revised policy we had a few years ago. Before a revised policy, a lot of this money would still sit in the locality and not go anywhere. But because we have our new policy, they have to give it up.
There's really no incentive or disincentive in the process for them to do this. I mean, it just, if I'm a locality and I'm sort of self-interested and inwardly focused, I sit on it till maybe it works. But that's not in our best interest. Commonwealth's best interest. What?
Madam Chair, I could be mischaracterizing the projects that our distinguished Vice Chairman was talking about, but it's to me, the projects that you were describing are very much like if indeed it was the developer that was going to make the match, not unlike these access grants that we give. It's the carrot. So I don't blame the community for coming to us with something like that when they could present that carrot to the developer, and the developer may choose to back out, but at least, you know, the money didn't sit for 8 years, it sat for a year. So there's some precedence of us dangling those carrots. I'm not fond of any of it, but but I do understand it.
Are you speaking for or against it?
I'm
Or both?
both.
Both.
If you notice, you'll never hear me vote.
That's how
You don't know how I vote.
You
I don't
need to run
ever-
for office.
I don't ever verbalize my vote, so you don't know how I vote.
Look into this more. I do, Mr. Whitworth actually chaired that task force on revenue sharing, and so maybe there is something that we can manage the funds more efficiently.
Madam Secretary, I believe the resolution for the revised revenue sharing policies, it'd say after 2 cycles, we would revisit the policy and see how it's working. So this is our 2nd cycle, so
Perfect.
it is perfect timing.
Excellent. Anything else? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
The final action is I have is for a revenue sharing allocation transfer in Rockingham County. The county has requested that surplus allocations be transferred from an existing revenue sharing project, which is complete, that's Reservoir Street, to an existing 6-year plan non-revenue sharing project, John Wayland Highway, which needs funds to award construction by February. In order to transfer the funds, the full board must establish the project receiving the revenue sharing funds as a revenue sharing project and approve the allocation. The John Wayland Highway project will provide for the construction of bicycle, pedestrian, and buggy lanes on both sides of John Wayland Highway. The project is administered by the county and has been advertised, and the requested funding of $121,942 will allow the project to remain on schedule for a February 2020 award. The Local Assistance Division recommends approval of the resolution and to establish the John Wayland Highway as a revenue sharing project and approval of the transfer.
Madam Chair, I make this motion, and this is within the guidelines that we have set forth, and it is working where surplus funds from a completed project is now allowing another project to be completed, and so I heartily recommend.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Morning, Laura Farmer.
Good morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. Today I bring before you to consider for action the advance of toll facility revolving funds to support construction and tolling integration for the Interstate 64 from the interchange at 664 and 264 to I-264. I remind you of your actions from approximately about 2.5 years ago, where you reviewed the concept of the Hampton Roads Express Lanes network, as well as provided some advance funding for the preliminary engineering, analysis, and construction related to this segment in the amount of $10 million. This action advances further funds related to tolling integration for the high-rise bridge, as well as the cost to complete construction and tolling integration for segment 2, which is $21.9 million. The total of those 2 components is $28 million. If you choose to approve this action, that leaves about $40 million in toll facility revolving for future actions. Happy to entertain
Make a
questions.
motion we approve, please.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Donahue.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I have 2 resolutions before you this morning. The first deals with the I-95 corridor plan. As we talked about in December, what we are recommending to the board is that we submit this interim plan to the General Assembly with the kind of base operational improvements being the only aspect of the plan moving forward at this time. And again, just a quick refresher on the rationale for that determination is we have in the interstate funds under current law a certain amount that needs to be used on 95, a certain amount that needs to be used on 64, and then discretionary funding available statewide. We did not believe that we could provide a prioritized recommended list of capital projects for the 95 corridor without having done a 64 corridor plan, because at that point you kind of have discretionary dollars, and we could recommend to you to award those to 95, and then we might complete the 64 plan and say, hold on, we want to revise that now that we have new information. So the concept here is you would be approving the submittal of the interim report to the General Assembly with the acknowledgement that we will be coming back in the coming year after we complete the 64 corridor plan to have a longer and more robust discussion about prioritizing projects across these various interstate corridors, as there is funding statewide available for these interstate corridors. So, Madam Chair, we do move adoption, and or recommend, adoption, and be happy to answer any questions.
So move.
Any further discussion?
I would just make the same observation that I did on the prior motion, which is in the appendices, there are lists of places in my section of 95 that have been identified. Public has not had a chance to comment on these at this point in time. So, we'll make sure. We've not seen the final.
And it's just an interim report. So
just as clarification, every location listed in the interim report was presented to the public in the second round of the public meetings there. So there are no new locations, to my knowledge, that are included in that list.
And I would just note that at our particular hearing, no public comment was allowed. And so for a variety of reasons, I'm not sure I understand, but that was what happened. So we've just had a little bit of a confusion, I think, on our section, and I just want to make sure that folks who are listening understand there's plenty of time still to comment.
And although I advanced the motion, I again concur.
I wonder if well, we can do the vote, but I would think maybe to announce what those dates are so that people in our districts will know. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.
Madam Secretary, the tentative Northern Virginia meeting is on January 28th.
So Mr. Manel, would you just announce it? Because I know people listen to this.
Fan base.
Secretary, members of the board, January
What are the dates?
January 27th from 6 to 8 p.m., VDOT Fredericksburg District Auditorium, and that will be a joint meeting with the FAMPO group. And then on January 28th from 6 to 8 p.m. at South County Middle School in Lorton. And then on January 30th at the Hilton Garden Inn in South Park for the Richmond and Hampton Roads District combined from 5 to 7 p.m.
I also wonder, is anybody from DRPT joining you at those meetings?
Yes, I've requested that they be present because we will be providing some information on the CSX rail agreement that is recently.
The presentation that Mike McLaughlin presented yesterday was just very well done, and so I'm hoping that they'll be there because there's a lot of interest in having that information at the public hearing. So I think that would be great, and it actually allows them to have a much fuller picture of what we're able to do.
But given that we're voting,
Yes.
I just feel compelled to put it on
Those
the record.
dates will be on the Virginia 95 corridor study website.
Will be or are?
They should be on there now.
Okay.
In part, and in part, I just, making the decision to delay the third round was in large part because of the rail negotiations, and wanted to make sure that as recommendations were coming forward, that those along the 95 corridor were not surprised or didn't feel like they couldn't have an input into it. So as always, when we go out to the public hearings, we will be gathering all that input and incorporating those thoughts into our planning going forward.
Again, Madam Secretary, we understand that, but this is something that's very important to our district.
Absolutely, and that's why I reiterated that point. I concur.
Madam Chair, the next resolution is Resolution 19. This deals with it's a follow-on from the presentation you received this morning and the various workshops you've had over the last 6 months. This is a resolution where the board would adopt the vision, goals, and objectives for VTrans, as well as the midterm needs assessment, as well as provide some ongoing direction to the folks at the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, as well as VDOT and DRPT as we move forward with further development of some of the long-range planned items. So with that, we recommend adoption. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Madam Secretary, I would move adoption with the insertion in the second to the last, be it further resolved, of the words if warranted, following, provide recommendations.
Where exactly are you inserting that?
It's the second to the last, be it further resolved. So it's on page 4 of 4. And the words would come in the third line, Mr. Brown. So it says VDOT and DRPT review and provide recommendations, and it would be comma, if warranted, comma, to modify the board action.
I consider that a very friendly amendment. So I have a motion second. Any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. So now we have the amended resolution before us. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Thank you, Ms. Hines.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Ms. Deem, I was looking for you. I did not see. I'm thinking, oh, are you here? You must have just been right
Here.
out of my sight. So,
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm pleased to bring before you today item number 20, which is a location decision for the Martinsville Southern Connector. The resolution seeks the board's approval for that location as alternative C as presented. It further directs VDOT to look at the adjustments to that preferred alternative as requested by Henry County within the existing budget. It also seeks to ensure that this board approves any additional funding associated with the project from the Martinsville Southern Connector. And you'll see also in the resolution the 3-year time frame after completion of the final EIS, at which point a project from the Martinsville Southern Connector will need to be fully funded in the 6-year improvement program, or this board will need to seek to extend or rescind its location decision, and that would also apply programmatically, as you'll see in the further resolve clause, which gives VDOT 5 months to look back at former location decisions by this board to see if any fall within that context. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, clarifications.
Mr. Smoot.
Madam Secretary, I move approval of this resolution. Let me say that over the past month or so, that this matter has received a great deal of attention. Scott Kasperwitz and I have been in almost daily conversation about it, and I have found that a very educational and helpful experience, truly, and appreciate Scott's work on this. This resolution really addresses 2 things. One is permitting the work to go forward, which would likely result in a permitting of this route after the studies and further consideration is complete. The other is it deals with a much more global question, and that is how long should the permitting of any project of a route be permitted to stand. And as we know, the environmental impact statements have a 3-year life and have to be updated after 3 years if a project is going forward. But the actual routing decision, perhaps under current policy or practice, can last forever. So basically, the resolution says that effective January 1, that any highway project which routing is approved on will expire if the project is not funded within a 3-year time frame after that approval, after the approval of the permitting process, and that the board, the CTB, obviously has the ability, as it does on all things, to revisit the question if there's new information at that time or any other time. But this would build a fence, if you will, around routing decisions that would expire if a project does not appear to be funded to move forward. So I'm pleased to move this resolution. This is at least the 10th version of it. Scott, we can wallpaper a room or two with all the former versions, but thank you.
The second, Madam Secretary. I would like to offer a technical amendment, though. This is a recommendation.
I was just going to ask about this. Yeah, I didn't know if the...
Nick caught this last night. I think we should. This is in the third be it resolved paragraph. We'd like to add the words after the word decision, for a highway. This would make it clear that other reservations specifically for rail would not be subject to the same expiration.
Expiration provision.
This is the expiration of the reservation that's placed based on our preferred alternative selection.
That is simply a technical amendment.
Simply a technical correction.
Mr. Smoot, just...
It was in the 31st draft, I think it
Mr.
was
Hall,
caught.
technical amendment to this, which just clarifies what we're doing, so that part is good. So may I have a motion on the amendment?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on clarifying for highways? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Mr. Smoot, do I need to get a new motion? Would you do mind, with the amendment, making the motion again?
I move approval of the resolution as amended.
Madam Secretary, just... I'll be brief. So I'll start with a request, and that is a request that. Have I so encumbered this?
Minutes, I was looking at my.
So I'm going to first politely ask Mr. Smoot if he'll remove the call block from my cell phone number at the conclusion of this. Now, in all seriousness, we have spoken daily for an extraordinary period of time. We've become great pals in that time frame. I just wanted to comment on the three principal modifications that have been made to this, and I think this is good policy that's come from this decision. First, this is a legacy project that we're trying to fit in to our current V-Trans smart scale construct, especially from a perspective of what constitutes needs. And that creates some challenges given the discipline that this board has shown, in, especially with regard to funding projects where there's a clear availability of funding at some point in the future. So I think we've worked through those issues to the extent that can be worked through. I will vote in favor of this, but the three provisions that I think are especially meaningful is the 3-year expiration of the reservation that comes with our decisions. And we spoke of this at great length on the Ashland decision that we made under a DRPT environmental impact statement. And I think it's right and appropriate that we give those in a designated area of a future highway alignment an exit, and this 3-year provision does that. It's a very important addition to this. And as Ms. Demas pointed out, we will go back now and look at other reservations that have been placed to see if the 3-year reservation should apply to them as well. The second is that, perhaps the third is that one of the challenges we faced with this was the alignment of the purpose and need in the EIS document, which I understand is actually created by the FHWA and not Virginia. But the attempt in the third, the last be it resolved, is to attempt to create better alignment between our needs identified in the guiding principles of V-Trans and the ultimate purpose and need that ends up in the federal EIS documents. So that's also a meaningful component of this, and I thank Ms. Deem and others for their help in helping work through these issues in a relatively short period of time.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. I will just conclude by saying thank you, Mr. Smoot. Thank you, Mr. Kasowitz, and everyone who has actually worked on that. There are very good policy implications from this, so I do appreciate the work and collaboration.
Morning, Madam
Mr.
Secretary,
Caples,
members
good
of the board.
morning.
I have 3 items for your consideration
today. The first project is order number B36. This is a Salem District project on Interstate 81. We had 2 bidders on this project. After conducting our bid analysis, we find that the bids represent both market value as well as a good value for the Commonwealth, and we are seeking for your approval.
Mr. Smoot. I was at Salem. Still, yeah.
Hello.
So move.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Next project is order number B30. This is a Bristol District project for the bridge replacement over Powell River. We had 6 bidders on this project. Again, after conducting our bid analysis, we find that the bids represent both market value as well as a good value for the Commonwealth and are seeking for your approval.
Mr. Stinson.
Madam Secretary, so moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.
And the final project today is Design Build 104, DB 104. This is a Hampton Roads District project in James City County. This project had 2 bidders. Again, after conducting a bid analysis, we find that the bids represent both market value and a good value, and we're seeking for your approval.
Move for approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.
Thank you.
Thank you. New business? Anything from the board? With that, Happy New Year to everybody. We are, and I said this to Mr. Kasputz, who is over in the Patrick Henry building visiting the office this week. Having CTB as the General Assembly is kind of kicking off is a challenging time. So I just thank you all for your patience in working with us, and we just have an exciting year ahead of us. So I thank you. Have a great day.